And it's a good morning to the smaller Sportzfan Radio panel than usual today. A couple joining us a little bit later, but I thought we'd start today. Judge, concussions in the headlines again, it seems to be every week. And this week we found that there have been 2 class actions issued. How have you seen that from a legal perspective before we get to what it's all about with the AFL?
Yeah, thanks, Professor. Look, it sort of comes around every year, doesn't it? It's sort of like, you know, the hot cross buns are out too early, and those sort of perennial issues. It's concussion, but we've followed this for 10 years, I'd say, and it's a serious issue. And unfortunately, it just gets rolled out as a bit of an interesting topic whenever somebody belted. Made more interesting, of course, by the news that there are some class actions. I've got my doubts, Professor, about these class actions. Whilst I thought originally that this could be catastrophic for the league, so I'm not sure what insurance they actually cover for these cases. As you guys would know, class actions are actually very difficult. The classic class action is something like asbestosis, where you've got workers in a mine, they all get the same injury. It goes to the same part of the body. It pretty much has the same catastrophic effect, including untimely death. So it's a neat package to put a ribbon around. Concussion in football isn't so simple. You've got to prove, like in all actions, a duty of care, a breach of the duty, and damages flowing from that breach. So what duty does the authority owe? Well, who's the authority? Is it the AFL? Is it the particular league? Is it the club? What about players that have pre-existing injuries? What about people who have other injuries at work which contribute? Is the level of negligence exactly the same for that particular person? And the varieties are, I won't say they're infinite, they're not, but they're multifarious. There's many ways that you can be injured, and there's many ways that you can abdicate your duty of care. So I think it's actually going to be problematic, Professor. What I think will happen is that most of these cases will just be resolved. They'll be settled, but at considerable cost, because I think the AFL has abdicated responsibility in terms of concussion. They haven't treated it seriously enough. I read Gorgeous Gill McLaughlin the other day saying that he had a concussion injury when he played, and he recovered. Brackets, ergo, it's not a problem. Well, Gill, it is a problem. It's a major problem. You haven't paid proper attention to it. And I think the veritable chickens are going to come home to roost soon. I think it's going to be very expensive, but not in the way that the media are portraying it.
John, just 2 quick questions for you on that. Are the lawyers for the football players trying to win their case in the media before they take it to court? So there's that bias thinking. And secondly,
the answer is yes. These lawyers can't help themselves. Yeah. It actually annoys me that these class action lawyers becoming the star of the show rather than the actual action itself. And yes, because these things play out in the court of public opinion, as you know, particularly when it comes to Australia's favourite sport, Australian rules football. So yes.
And I suppose secondly, everyone knows when you play sport, all various different sports, there is a risk of injury, which participants willingly accept. And I suppose for our listeners, what do the plaintiff solicitors have to prove to take it from, you go out and you play sport and you can do a hamstring or you can do a back or, you can get a bump and you willingly take the risk, to saying there is negligence on behalf of a body. And of course, with these plaintiffs, they're going to be, as you said, they may have got a knock in their junior football in a different league. They may have got a knock in AFL football. They may get a knock in football, say the Southern Football League.
Well, the lawyers love talking Latin terms, and of course the Latin term here is volenti non fit injuria, which basically means a voluntary assumption of risk. It means that you take on board certain risks. Now, if you're walking down the street, you don't accept the risk that somebody's going to punch you in the face. But if you step into a boxing ring, that's exactly the risk that you assume, and that's contained within the rules of the game. Now, and the way in which the game or the sport is regulated. Now, if the particular sport abdicates its responsibility to provide a safe workplace, which is really what it is, and there is negligence involved, well, then the particular player has a cause of action. But as you say, then it's contributory. Did they have this accident or this injury before? Did they get this injury from work, say, or some way other than sport, which only contributed? It's complex. It's not simple.
Good afternoon, gents. Can I jump in if I just briefly?
Yeah.
Just one thing I did read. It's obviously not my understanding, but this is what apparently might differentiate the Australian class actions with the NFL action in particular, is that there was a level of awareness by the governing body about concussion at the time the players, the subject of those class actions, were playing. Now, that's very different to what I think here with the AFL, NRL and all sports. We're all in the process of learning about this for the first time along with the players. So if you'd have to agree, Judge, if a governing body is aware of the risks and knows the studies, even if preliminary studies, but is on notice about the danger and yet allows the players to play unrestricted. I can already see the defence for the AFL and the NRL will be, as soon as we became aware of the dangers and the medical science behind it, we took steps A, B, C. NRL will be saying we put into place as soon as we knew concussion protocols, et cetera, very different to being on notice, almost like the tobacco type cases where they knew and yet they kept manufacturing the product.
Yeah, the concussion too, Paul, it gets confused with the CTE, the chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which you only can detect post-death, post-mortem. But the concussion, I think, and it's interesting, I think the AFL class sections are positing their cases after 1994. I think that's the line in the sand. They say, well, at that time, without doubt, the league knew about the risks associated with concussion injuries. And it's not that they didn't take steps, it's whether they took adequate and reasonable steps. And that's going to be the start of the battle. We were just saying before you came on, Paul, that you have to, I think class actions are problematic for something like AFL, NRL, because the way that you sustain your injuries is different for every player, for every club, every league. Bearing in mind, there's not just AFL, there's a whole lot of other leagues out there that this could become a potential cause of class action for.
Judge, part of the argument will be, won't it, that not so much that a player sustained a concussion, but what was done after they sustained the concussion and their treatment thereafter, and whether that was adequate. Because I think we can all say quite rightly, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, Judge, that players who go onto a football field voluntarily assume that they could get a knock in the head and they could be concussed.
And to take Exhibit A, Paddy McCartan of St Kilda, was it 9 or 10 concussions he's got? He's still back playing with Sydney. You can't hold him back. He knows he has a predilection to be injured. He knows the way he plays. He's going to get himself injured, and he keeps on going back into it. At what point do you say you can't play? Because you can't make a player play differently than they do. I'm trying to think of that cricketer, Gelding, who's also had a series of concussions, a Victorian.
I know the name just escapes me too.
Me
John.
too. It's not Palaszczuk, but it's something like that. But anyway, he obviously has a way of playing the game that leads himself to get hit with a ball in the head. So yes, you do take a voluntary acceptance of risk. But as you say, Professor, what assistance do they get at the time? How long are they not allowed to play for? What medical follow-up is there, etc. But then, as I say, you've got to apply that back to the suburban country leagues. They just don't have that level of sophistication of doctors, and most players aren't insured for this kind of thing, and they just go to their local doctor, and you'll be okay in 2 or 3 weeks. I think this just lead to a massive rethinking about the post-trauma assistance given to players. And Paul, that apply more to your sport because they are seriously belted in your game.
Well, speaking about the level of sophistication and resources, you got Kalen Ponga, one of the best in the game, being flown to Canada for specialist treatment. So you couldn't get someone doing that down at the Newport Jets, just being flown off by his club to Canada to get specialist concussion scans. So that's one of the best 10 players in the game, of course, but that shows how serious it's being taken. And he's on a very strict return to the game, if at all. And that's how serious the Knights are taking it. And I have no doubt the NRL in the background is more than supportive of that. You've got a guy who missed the last 6 weeks of the season. He's been knocked out already this year in round 2. So, if I was his manager, I'd probably be telling him to hang the boots up. But again, that's his living. That's what he does. So it's a tough one.
Judge, just before you go on, Gelding, the player you were thinking of, Judge, was Will Pekowski.
Pekowski, yeah, that's it. Will Pekowski.
Go on, Gelding.
I was just going to ask the panel, but especially the judge and things like that. We've had helmets in the years in football and in local football, suburban football, country football, and in league football. Like I think I can remember going back to Paul Callery at St Kilda, wearing a helmet, for kind of head knocks. And that, what's that, 30 years ago?
Oh, Judge? Yeah, easily. Yeah, yep, at least.
Where is, and this is more for the listeners, where is the kind of choice of a player being able to wear a helmet to protect themselves, or the league not enforcing the wearing of helmets?
I think, Gillian, the jury is out with helmets. I don't think there's any actual evidence which suggests that it's makes a genuine difference. And there is an argument that it actually makes it worse because players have this false sense that they're going to be protected. And yet when they get hit, it's not so much the how it's described to me is that it's just a collision injury is a collision injury because you're going at a certain speed and then you hit a brick wall, or worse, a brick wall coming the other way. It's that effect upon your brain. It jangles your brain, to use a scientific word. It unsettles your brain. And I don't know if helmets actually make that much difference. And when you weigh it up against the sense of invincibility, which in itself is dangerous, as I say, I think the jury's out. I'm just trying the last one. Top player was probably Jason Dunstall, who wore a helmet. I'm just not sure whether he would say. I don't know. It actually helped him that much. Well, they did.
Yeah, I just noticed. I do notice in cricket, as you said, there's more hits in the head since helmets have been introduced. And I do know I was kind of in that era when they first came in. When you put them on, it limited your movements of your head. You used to be able to duck the last minute or just weave so the ball would miss you. But with a heavy helmet on your head, they're a lot more lightweight now. And I noticed jockeys have been wearing helmets for, 70, 80 years. However, you still get concussions in those sports.
And also take a cricket ball hitting your head. It's a very fast moving, what's at 130, 40 kilometres an hour, a little ball hitting a certain part of your head. I think that's probably an entirely different injury than a 100-kilogram bloke running 30 kilometres per hour at your head. I think that is a massive difference, but also a massive trauma.
A different injury. Yeah,
it's a different injury.
Judge, you were talking about local football.
Mm.
Are we going to see a trickle-down effect where players who've been injured at grassroots level are then going to see what AFL players are doing and saying, well, hang on, I'm just as bad as they are.
Yeah.
Why don't I do something now? The level of insurance at grassroots level is nothing like what it is at the AFL level. So what's that going, what could that possibly do to grassroots football and grassroots rugby?
Well, of course, if you're a 25-year-old player playing for Witchy-proof seconds and you are badly injured as a result of negligence, well, the damage to you is just as severe. Now, the damages you recover may not be as much because, of course, you weren't being paid, but it means you can't work. It could be massive. So what I think long-term this will mean is a huge injection of capital into insurance policies, which will obviously cost money, and the league's just going to have to find that money. But bearing in mind, the AFL, ever since the Demetrio days, controls everything in the game of Australian rules football, to the point where the league is actually the name of the sport now. It's actually referred to as the AFL. So I think a lot more money if the game's going to survive.
What about and you mentioned it, the investigation, if you like, of each player and their pre-existing medical history before they walked onto a football field? That's going to take ages to comb through.
And that's why I think this concept of a class action is going to be a bit of a misnomer. I think it's going to be to be properly run. I can't see a silver bullet where one case will win and the rest of the other 1,000 will, or 200 will fall into place. I think it'll be a very long, expensive, tedious exercise to go through each case. Can't see it being done any other way.
Paul, have you heard any whispers about a similar class action being prepared by multiple rugby league players against the NRL?
If there hasn't been, there certainly would be soon. There's a very sad story of Mario Fenech, a Rabbitohs legend, and I remember how tough he was because that was in my teenage years watching him play, but it's at the point he can't remember his son's name and his wedding and who his wife is. So it's really tragic. But I'm sure that they're in the background preparing that as well, because it'd be on a similar terms of the AFL. It has been launched, yeah. They're more in England, though, I think. So there is a Super League class action on foot for English, Welsh and Scottish players. That was 2021. That must still be pending. And there is reports way back then it was pending. So I'm pretty sure they're marshalling the troops. I think it's at the moment it's just the AFL players is what I'm seeing who've launched. But I'm sure that the NRL players would quickly get on board if it's very similar.
Probably a watch this space.
Yeah, I'm not aware yet. I know there's 60 former AFL players, and there'd be just as many, I'd say, NRL players, given they more hits in my game than the Rolling Stones. Sorry.
I just think this is also going to be one of the factors relevant to the appointment of the new CEO. After Gorgeous Gill, they're looking at a number of options, and it's just interesting that Andrew Dillon, who's been my favourite, for a year, is all over this stuff. And I think that if I'm right, that this is going to be a very expensive little exercise. The AFL would want to have the right person in the chair controlling this stuff. And another reason why I think Andrew Dillon, I think would be a good choice.
Okay. All right. Well, talking NRL there, it's a good segue, Paul. And before we get to the round 4 matches, news overnight that Joseph Suwale, the prodigal or Phenom young player with Sydney Roosters, is gone to Rugby Australia from October 2024.
He has. So he's been signed up by the Roosters for next year, but it's Brandon Smith. You can never fault him for being quite humorous. He said he'll be 16 by the time he gets back from rugby union. He's very young. He's very humble, but for $1.6 million a year, he is joining to do one thing you can't do in rugby league, which is play, with all seriousness, world tournaments. And Rugby Union World Cup is a lot bigger than the Rugby League World Cup. As much as it's improving, that's the reason why he's going. But another thing as well is the British and Irish Lions tour. That only happens, from memory, only every 12 years that they come here. So he's been signed for that and the 2027 Rugby World Cup at $1.6 million a year. He'll be the highest paid ever rugby union player. And friends of mine who know the rugby union schoolboy system in Sydney said he's the best. I've been saying this a few times on the show. Best prospect they've ever had through that school, or the school system in Sydney, in 30 years. So we're not talking about any old player in rugby union having an Aladdin's cave of money. This is a very special talent being targeted for two tournaments in particular. Peter V'landys has come out and said he's annoyed, obviously, as he often is, but he said in rugby they play around 33 minutes a match, but in league the ball is in play for 57 minutes. So it'll be a lot easier to earn your money. I think you'll get very bored in rugby league and come back. Rugby union, and come back. That's what a lot of the players do. And there's quite a few examples of rugby league players who've gone across to union and come back. But you can't blame him for the prestige of those tournaments and $1.6 million a year. And if the Roosters can't keep him without making any insinuations, no one could have.
Paul, we always can depend on Peter V'landys for a quote. Apart from the timing of how long he's been playing or how long he'd be playing in each game, he said he's gone for the, in inverted commas, easy money.
Well, I think that's related to he's a winger. And Brandon Smith also said, I don't think a teenage winger from the Roosters is going to help Australia beat the All Blacks in rugby union. He may well have a point. You're going to need more than a winger to beat the All Blacks. So it's I don't know the equivalent in AFL, but he's a strike player, but you're only as good as the people that are feeding you. So they really must want some talent for $1.6 million for a winger.
Are you aware of them targeting anybody else?
He'd be the number one pick. He's got a rugby union pedigree, and it has been flagged. I'm not aware of him going after anyone else, but I am. The Rabbitohs captain, Cameron Murray, who's just a workhorse, clean skin. He'll captain Australia one day, I've got no doubt. He's on their radar, but you better believe the Rabbitohs won't be letting him go.
All right, let's look at round 4. And where else could we start better than this? And I know Schooner's watching on, waiting for your summation of Rabbitohs 13, Manly 12, 1 in Golden. Tell me this, Paul, was your heart in your mouth when Manly had that shot with about 10 seconds to play, but it got charged down?
Yeah, and it was also there when Latrell Mitchell had a shot. He's normally a big game player, Latrell, but he went missing with his shot, which was like a pretty badly struck 3-iron, it looked like. It didn't look like going over. So I certainly was a bit stressed. I watched the end of the match. I was at a friend's place, but managed to see the end of it with a non-sports fan. So I did make sure I saw at least the end of it. John Sattler, very sad news during the week, passed away, a Rabbitohs legend. So the Rabbitohs had half a rabbit on their jersey in tribute, that almost the equivalent of a half-mast flag. So they were playing with a lot of emotion. You would have seen the celebrations. And it's appropriate that Lachlan Ilias kicked the goal, because if you look what Adam Reynolds is doing at the Broncos, it's good that the guy that we let Reynolds go to keep stepped up and nailed his first field goal. So that was good to see Lachlan Ilias, the young gun, performing under pressure. I do have to say, only 3 weeks in, but I think 7 out of my top 8 predictions are in the 8, and also in the top 8 betting. The biggest riser, Professor, we do have to talk about this, is the Broncos. They're into third in line in the betting, if you can believe it. So pre-season, you might recall, we had players saying Kevin Walters isn't much of a coach, and Adam Reynolds does most of the coaching. I don't know who's in charge at the Broncos, but they are absolutely flying, the Broncos. They're looking better than almost anyone.
Tell me this, Paul. Was it an injudicious kick to try and score the try with scores level, and then it gets run back the length of the field so that they go down by 6 points?
Yeah, well, that's probably right. I mean, the Dolphins, a lot of people would have liked to see them win again, but to see the Broncos firing is just great for rugby league. And it actually might make the Cowboys and the Titans a bit nervous how well the Dolphins are going, because they would have presumed that they're going to be also runs in the tournament. So the Cowboys outlasted the Titans. I don't think the Titans are due a great year, but the Cowboys certainly aren't going to be threatening, I don't think, at the end of the season. The round kicked off with a fantastic game with the Eels beating the Panthers. That was something not many expected, but Mitchell Moses stepped up and showed why he's on the money he is. No one at that stadium would have thought he wasn't worth $1 million a year. So he's re-signed with the Eels after a lot of argy-bargy, and Eels fans will be very happy with that win over their biggest rivals, the Panthers, as am I, as are most fans.
Well, they had to win that one, didn't they, Paul? Otherwise, they would have been in a very deep hole at 0-4.
They would have been. I didn't think they'd manage it, but I think, like the Storm, there's some chinks in that armour, and the Storm got away with it against the Tigers. They weren't at their best. Craig Bellamy's head, if it hasn't exploded yet, would be close to exploding. They got enough out of their team to win over the Tigers, but wow, they're going to have to lift the Storm if they want to contest this year.
So 3 games today, Paul. My Bulldogs playing the Warriors in an hour and a half. Have I got a chance?
I'm surprised you're outsiders. I think you'll win. $2 outsiders. It's not exactly massive outsiders, but you are playing across the Dutch. But I still think you'll win that game this afternoon at 2:00. Then you've got the Knights minus Kalen Ponga, who's off getting his scone scanned in Canada. The Raiders will be too strong there. And then you got the woeful Dragons, whose coach, if you don't mind, Professor, has been asked to reapply for his own job. So we've gone from hot seat to applying to get onto the hot seat. So that's a first for me, I think. And the Sharks will win that quite comfortably. So there's 3 winners for you today, I think.
So you're going all away sides?
Yes, that's well spotted. Yes. So, I'm taking all of those 3 home teams on with a three-peat.
With a three-peat. All right. Before we go on to the next topic, I see Cooter's joined us in the leafy suburbs of which suburb are you in, Cooter?
I'm in East Ringwood, I think. It might actually be called Croydon today, Professor. Just at local footy on a Sunday. What's really what you want to be doing.
Now, Judge, you had a couple of questions I think you wanted to ask Cooter about our earlier concussion.
Yeah, g'day, Cooter. We're just having a discussion about the class actions and what will happen with them. And I've got my doubts as to whether it's as simple as the media are portraying it. There'll be a class action and then it'll be successful and 200 people will win their case. I think it's a lot more complex. I just, a question without notice to you, but just wondering if you know about the insurance status of AFL itself and then your local leagues, like where you are at the moment, what the insurance is like for clubs and players.
Well, we've had a young girl playing in the under-14s this morning break her collarbone, and we waited for the ambulance and it wasn't forthcoming, so we drove her to hospital. I'm not 100% certain about the insurance, John. I wouldn't think this would even be covered in the insurance.
I suspect
who would want to be a club doctor going forward? And the other one that's interesting, and I know we're talking about AFL, but have you ever watched the NRL when they do a test on concussion on the ground? So the trainer, who I assume would be qualified, and Paul might know, he does a couple of tests and then gives a thumbs up to the bench, and then maybe 5 minutes later, the independent doctor who's in the ARC, which we have, he will then notify the referee that that player should come off.
With a tap on the head. They get the tap on the head to go off. Yeah.
Get the tap on the head to go off. And so that player then goes for a HIA, head injury assessment, and it means that they can't come back on for 15 minutes. I think it is. Now, there's so many things around this, and the AFL media, I think, is in the lowest point of its life. They're reporting on things that, like, this is not going to be easy. I'm not sure why, if you were running the case, why you would have Gary Ablett speaking. I would think that Gary's got other, there's a lot of other things with Gary Ablett. And then the other one, of course, Professor, is, sorry about that, if the player then goes and plays local sport or junior sport once they fit, or senior sport once they finish it, or is that club then on the hook as well? So there's a lot of moving parts to this. As you said, it's not as easy as what the media is portraying. And really, we shouldn't be. I wouldn't have thought you'd be getting interviews from players talking about what happened and what didn't happen. I think it's just fraught with danger, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that, like, do you get players to sign waivers going forward, and who's ever going to sign one?
And you couldn't waive any entitlement for past action as well. So
is the AFL doing their best to make it a less dangerous sport from a head side? I would think they are. But can they totally do it? I wouldn't have thought so. And again, like I think we've talked about before, is the AFLW, those girls don't necessarily know how to protect themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've got the issue with head knocks and concussions as well.
In fact, the stats, Cooter, is that the injuries to the girls, head, knees, and, well, broken collarbone you just got today, as I understand, is a far greater rate than the boys.
Yep. And what should happen is that should go down over time as more girls come through the whole system. So once they start kicking, they go all the way through. Yep. But at the moment, we've got a lot of girls that have played, or women, I should say, that have played different sports. And they may have played, like, obviously we've got Frisbee players, and we've got basketball, netball, rugby sevens, I think we've now got. So Gaelic football, of course. So there's a lot of different sports that we've now got. But, yeah, I just think that the whole concussion thing, it's a huge thing going forward. And obviously we've been over it with the NFL. If we think we've got problems, then the NFL's got even bigger problems.
They've also got deeper pockets. And I think they're prepared to pay out $1 billion every 5 or 6 years or so. That seems to be the pattern, because they can.
Just a question to you all. David, you bring up an interesting thing with other injuries apart from concussions. If it's not covered by insurance and these local clubs don't have the assets to meet expenses, would you want to be a president or secretary or treasurer of a local sporting body? Or would you be liable in some way?
Well, I'm treasurer, obviously, of East Ringer Junior Footy Club, and we've got no assets. We've got cash only now. Jeez, it's frightening to even think of that, Gelding, sorry.
Forget East Ringwood. Secure the Football Club hasn't got assets. They've
got a lot of debt secured.
So they might be able to. They couldn't afford one payer.
They might be able to sell Linton Street.
Judge Cooter asked an interesting question. I think it was Cooter. It might have been you. Who would want to be a club doctor? Because what I can envisage is what happens, and the panel's all experienced in legal matters, is that the person who's, let's just say, the action is against the AFL and the particular club, then they will be looking around to try and defray their risk or spread the risk. So what's to stop the club from saying, well, Dr. Jones, we were relying on Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones said that the player was well enough to get. Now, the doctor should have known that what he was letting this player do was the wrong thing. So therefore, Dr. Jones will be joined as a defendant. So therefore, the medical insurance of doctors will be getting a workout. I would imagine we will see club doctors joined as defendants to these actions.
It's sacrilege to say this because it's one of the greatest days of my life. But the Rabbitohs doctor, after Sam Burgess had 8 bones broken in his face, 8 in the first tackle, looked at him and did a few tests. And as Cooter said, maybe like the US, how they test for drunkenness and driving, just walk in a straight line or something or other. But how he got on the field is beyond me. I don't want to obviously point fingers, but I'm sure that was in a different era. There would have been a tap on the head if that was these days to say, Sam, you're off.
Professor, as I said before, the AFL is nothing more than a labyrinth of contracts. Everything is contractual. And I'll bet you amongst the contracts that the AFL have got with clubs and players, there'll be a plethora of exclusionary clauses getting the AFL out of the doodah. And you're right, they'll have the clubs will then say, gee, we're in a bit of strife. Who can we pass this risk off to? Well, the doctors are all insured. Sounds like a perfect handball pass to the doctors.
Well, then that blurs the line, doesn't it? Because if you're saying, well, hey, listen, we had the framework. So yeah, it's an interesting argument and an interesting discussion.
Professor, yesterday we saw a shocking sling tackle from Shea Bolton. Broad. We saw Broad do a shocking sling tackle. Now, if that player can't play again, could he sue? Because of concussion?
You would think so.
Yeah, every chance he could.
So he'll get suspended. He'll get weak. So he'll be shown to be proven guilty of the action. So could he, if the player can never play again, could he possibly sue the player?
Well, amongst the risks that you voluntarily assume, Cooter, you don't assume the risk of being tackled and dealt with in that manner. It's against the rules. It's against common sense. So why not?
Yeah, he could. He could, Cooter.
Cooter, what do you think Broad should get?
Oh, I think he'll get 3 at a minimum, I would think.
Well, I would have thought after last week's kind of like a stupid thing to do.
Yeah.
For Broad, and especially seeing they were basically on the boundary line and it was over the boundary line. Like, I'm a Richmond supporter, but I think it should be, you got to get a bit tougher, don't you? Don't they have to be 4 and 6 weeks, these penalties?
Well,
like
that
Buddy
one,
Buddy got a week. He misses a Hawthorn game. You know, he's been doing it for 15 years. You know, they've just got to get, I don't know whether the penalty's not contributing or not getting through to them. It's got to be a stand sooner or later where they're mandatory 4 or 6 weeks, doesn't it? Plus, subject to injury. Just
he was over the
it.
line. So he's over the line, tackled, taken over the line, crunched. Now, Broad's going to ring him and apologise. Now, why would he ring him and apologise? Because he probably won't remember the incident.
Yeah, well, I think he has already apologised after the game, but the same thing. It was after all the publicity, it didn't stop someone, and all these reports and 3 weeks, it still didn't stop someone from doing the action and injuring someone. Or it always had the threat. So,
raising a good point, Gelding. You're raising a good point.
Yeah, and it's got to be to the stage, and this is against my side, remember, too. Look, why not give them 6 weeks, regardless of the injury? Don't make the injury what determines the punishment. You should be able to say an event has occurred, it could have done this. This is what it should be.
Is the Pickett one the prime example of that, Gelding?
Oh, well, I think Pickett, look, they were both bad. They were all bad. Pickett's looked the worst because he jumped into him. Yeah, in 2 weeks, that was everything they've been saying. If you choose to bump and you go to the head and you jump off the ground or sling them into the ground, it's still happening. So that there's no deterrent to the players as yet.
Judge,
Maybe 6 weeks would deter them.
Judge, now, we're in your wheelhouse, Judge. We're talking about penalties for transgressing. Gelding makes a good point as to whether the penalties are too light. In your experience, toughening penalties, does that stop people from committing actions that cause those penalties?
No, for the reason that in criminal law, Professor, deterrence has actually been proven not to work. It's counterintuitive. You'd think, 20 years for murder or 30 years for murder, it's going to deter people from murder. Well, it actually doesn't. And I've found that it's you play the game in a certain way, you have a certain personality, you are going to transgress irrespective of what the penalties are. And we've seen that. Serial offenders in the AFL, they just keep doing it. You mentioned Buddy. He just plays the game a certain way and he has a certain way of going about his craft. So I'd say not, personally.
Tom Hawkins would be the same as that, Judge. He's very clumsy, Tom.
Who's that? Yes, yeah.
Very clumsy. So, unfortunately for Tom, Dustin Fletcher was also very clumsy, Dustin. He didn't know what his legs were doing most of the time, but he managed to trip a lot of people up over his career.
He sure did. That's a good point.
But then again, and John, I understand your point of view when you talk about crime and murder and things like that. That's a whole different ballgame. This is like a professional sport that sets a tone for clubs underneath and all there and their role models and that. If Jason Broad, who's probably a $400,000 player, wasn't getting paid, couldn't partake in what he was doing, and if there was a sanction like that, would he be as keen to do it again?
See, again, you'd think not. What I'm saying is the reality just doesn't bear that process out, Gil. That's my experience.
Or is an alternative a send-off rule, which none of us want to see.
Yeah, I'm interested in that because it actually penalises the team, and that is a genuine deterrent. You're in a grand final without your best player for 15 minutes. Gee, that's a deterrent.
Yeah, and it'll stop players in the grand final taking out the opposition's best player.
Yep.
Would the sin bin be run by the umpires or by the ARC?
Well, without knowing anything, first you've got to come to the agreement whether you think the principle's right or wrong, or does have an effect.
My concern is you'd have the meatheads taking out the superstars, so that would be the worry. It wouldn't be a like-for-like swap if the star player, particularly in league, be the fullback, the 6, the 7, or the hooker, is taken out by a no-name who might just be on the field to make up the numbers and perform the hit. That would be difficult to agree to.
But that could happen now, Gerard.
Yeah. I don't want to name teams or coaches, but it seems to be that late in the game, there seems to be a lot more high hits than earlier in the game. But anyway, I don't want to get contested.
All right, let's move on to cricket. Gelding, I want to pose this one to you. Given Australia's improvement in form once Steve Smith was appointed captain, should he continue to captain the side for the Ashes campaign? And I can see you holding your head. Regale us with what you think.
Oh, dear, Professor. Should Steve Smith have been captain as the vice captain after Sandgate? Cummings has done very well in series leading up where we make 500 in the first innings and seems to be able to captains and have that. look, who knows what was on Cummings's plate, coming up to India, because obviously his mother was very, very ill leading up to it and during it and doing it, but he certainly didn't perform well in India. Professor, would I say Smith should be captain of Australia? Personally, I'd probably say yes. But that's just going back to the theory. Someone who's a batsman and is not bowling seems to have more time to be able to think about other moves or see things maybe that a bowler is not seeing because he's concentrating so much on, on just his bowling. So I would probably say yes, Professor. Will it happen? No. Pat Cummings will come back and be captain of Australia.
Judge, do you think that we as a society are too harsh on forgiving people once they've served a penalty for a transgression? Because it would seem to me that the only impediment Steve Smith has to captaining Australia is because he was involved in an incident a number of years ago now for which he served a fairly severe penalty. But it just seems to me that, well, it doesn't matter you serve the penalty. It doesn't matter. You're still not going to get a chance.
Professor, we spoke, this is 5 years ago now,
Yes.
sandpaper ago. We said at the time, we didn't jump on like all the media did. This is the worst crime since Ned Kelly, to listen to the media. We said at the time that in comparison to the penalties which were being handed out for this kind of activity, which none of us support, I thought it was really weak, actually. I thought it was pathetic what Steve Smith and Alia did at the time, but he has served his penalty, and I think move on. He's clearly, if you ask me, the standout candidate for captain. I think he lifts the tone of the team. They all seem to play better. Can I say more intelligently? I think he's an intelligent student of the game, and I think he's the obvious choice for captain. And for God's sake, get over it. And by the way, I'll make a prediction: he'll get it back anyway. I think Australian cricket will just say, "Oh well, let bygones be bygones," because he's the perfect person, particularly with an Ashes series coming up, to lead Australia. Whereas I don't think Warner is, and I don't think he ever was a leader type. So yes, in summary, bring Smith back.
Can I just say something on that, Judge? And you're right, he did serve a thing, and there was different kind of things. I would say that the offence of tampering with a ball is fundamental in cricket to gain an advantage. There's not much more you can really do than bring yourself into disrespect or bring the integrity of the game into dispute, is by tampering with the ball. And
I've been doing it for years, Gelding, and the
yes,
was
and we've
nowhere
been
near.
talking about it, and there's different degrees of it now. Whether there's a degree of picking a seam or putting sunblock on a ball to actually going and getting a piece of sandpaper to rough it up, whether the acts are the same, I don't know. I think it's that next step. Cummings, though, just has this demeanour about him. I haven't heard anyone say to Cummings, no. I noticed in a paper the other day, he was regarded as Australia's most marketable sports person still, and you've got some great legends in Barty and everyone like that, Sam Kerr, but they're still talking him up. And New South Wales cricket, where both Smith and Cummings are, I just think you'll find he'll come straight back in and captain the side and we'll move on. But as I said, my personal choice would be Smith.
Yep. Okay.
Paul, have you
Gelding.
Yeah, go on, Cooter.
Gelding, we're talking. You just talked state cricket. I didn't know that the Sheffield Shield final was on. Gelding, It's again been hidden like the A-League.
Yes, we wouldn't understand that there's a state final, the Sheffield Shield final on, would you? Remember, in days gone by, New South Wales Victoria used to play Boxing Day, and it was the MCG would be packed out. Now we have the final Western Australia Victoria being played over in Western Australia on the old Wacker ground, and unfortunately, it looks like a WA game.
Is the A-League still being played?
I believe so, Professor. It's been hidden away on Paramount. But just amazing, though, that, sorry, guys, the actual, the promotion of the league, and you compare that to the NBL and the resurrection of that competition, free-to-air TV, I would think that one's doing well, one's not, or not that we know of. So, no, just staggered me. And obviously the other week, Judge as well, Professor Gelding was the Marsh, was it the Marsh Cup final, the 50 over matches? Wasn't that played the other week as well?
Yes.
So,
and I'm just going through my paper, David, to where I get the form guide from, and I'm still looking for it. So,
might be on page 13.
Playing in the American comp.
Yeah. So, look, it's obviously, and is this kind of going back to what we were talking about? The Sheffield Shield was where players developed and where we got our test stars from. Now it's changed. They all go off to all the 2020 over games, and none of the players that are just missing the Australian 11 don't seem to come back into Sheffield Shield to get that experience, and the younger players don't get the experience of playing against the better players to qualify them for when they move up into Test cricket, hopefully. But yes, I suppose we have to move with the times, David.
Gelding, we talk about the development of players. Now, one that's actually, I would think, is thrived under the captaincy and is Will Sutherland.
Yep, been doing a fine job.
Will seemed to be just not going places, but also got the captaincy, and I think he's taken back-to-back fifers. So he's certainly one to watch, and obviously chose cricket over football.
Yes.
And his dad was obviously the previous CEO. But no,
should he have
certainly
lost the captaincy for the final?
Pardon?
Should he have lost the captaincy for the final?
No.
When the Australian cricketers came back?
No.
And they gave it to Hanscom? Yeah.
Would have been in both. Would have been in safe hands with both, but just a strange decision to get a captain back that they won 5 in a row.
Yep.
So
and Sutherland have been flying with, Yeah.
So.
All right, Gelling, perhaps finish this up today with your tips for Bairnsdale and Donald.
Well, Professor, we've got 56 seconds to get on the Great Seal in the first at Barnsdale today. We're in the Footscray colours. But, Professor, you wanted me to show David of Mordielli this sign, didn't you?
Oh, yes.
Yes. David, Professor and I discussed that hopefully you were following Nats racing yesterday, and you would have had a fill up after the Professor's wonderful tipping of Kalos paying $4, and we thought you might have had enough wins there to consider a brown paper bag at the Peking Duck House.
No, unfortunately, I didn't get to see that racing yesterday due to a prior commitment. And I didn't get a text message either. Sometimes you get a text message, but that seems to have gone out the window as well. So normally a very loyal viewer of that racing, but I did see the tipping this morning. So well done you two getting 3 winners.
Did you put your hand on the Bible as you were saying that, David?
Oh, it's there. I had a tennis grand final yesterday and had to prepare mentally to watch.
Very funny.
All right, Gelding, give us your other
Okay, Professor. Look, well done yesterday. You're in fine form with your tipping. So good to see. Just for the listeners, we gave out 4 tips and got three winners, so 75% win rate. Place rate's not a bad little effort, Professor. So pat yourself on the back. As I said today, Barnsdale, we like in the first rate, the Great Seal, but I have the TV on at the moment. It's playing up behind the barriers at the moment. We then go to race 2. We like Headline Story. Then in the Barnsdale Cup today, which is the time-honoured Barnsdale Cup, worth 70,000. Race 7, number 7, Charters. Couple of races in Donald I like, Professor. Race 2, number 3, Guzmo, into race 4, number 1, Coyote. So hopefully we can finish up with a few more tips after a very good Saturday, Professor.
Gelding, point of order, is it Barnsdale or Bairnsdale?
Either, John. I can leave it to you. I call it Barnsdale. Yeah.
2 schools for Professor, I think.
Well, Professor's more from that, has
Sorry,
more contacts in that district than I do, but I call it Barnsdale.
He could have the deciding vote, Professor.
Some of the locals call it brain.
Brainsdale.
Well, you say Newcastle, I say Newcastle. So, yeah, there you go.
I think it might be Bairnsdale, but who cares?
As long as we get the winner, Judge.
That's the most
right.
important thing.
Yeah, as long as Charters wins the Bairnsdale or Barnsdale Cup, we'll be happy.
All happy. All right.
All right, gentlemen. Thanks for your input today. Much